We talk about Sylvia Plath to the shadow of her death. We talk about Frida Kahlo through her physical pain and heartbreak. We talk about Van Gogh through the language of torment. Even when we admire these artists, we often turn their suffering into this main character of their lives, as if the paintings, the poems were produced by misery itself, rather than the skill, intelligence, the labor, and the artistic choice that these artists have put in. I think that is a problem with the myth of the tortured artist. It begins with the truth that many artists have suffered, and then it turns into a false rule, this false narrative that suffering is necessary for meaningful art. I don't think this is true. More than that, I think it's dangerous. Hi, I'm Nash, and this is the myth of tortured artist. The tortured artist myth confuses the material of art with the cause of art, right? So pain can become material, grief can become material, illness, loneliness, heartbreak, trauma, all of these can become material. But material is not the same as creation. A block of marble does not sculpt itself. A wound does not write a poem. The artist still has to survive all of these experiences, reflect on it, shape it, edit it, revise it, and make choices about how it will get communicated to the mass audience. The art is not the suffering, the art is the transformation. Let's go through a scenario. Imagine two people are going through the same heartbreak, right? So one person has time, the support, and emotional distance to sit with what happened. They begin writing, right? At first, everything is really messy and angry. They write too much, they spill it on the paper, they repeat themselves, they include details that matter to them, but they still do not know how it could matter to the reader. Over time, they edit, they notice that the real pain was not the breakup itself, but the moment they realized they had been making themselves smaller to be loved. That becomes the material. That becomes the center of the poem. Now imagine another person going through the same heartbreak, but they're isolated, they're exhausted, and they're overwhelmed. They're not making metaphors, they don't have the support, they're not discovering those profound truths. They're barely functioning, they're surviving, and they cannot create because they're in survival mode. The difference is not the one person's suffering was more artistic, the difference is that one person had enough stability to process that suffering. That is what the tortured artist myth leaves out. Suffering does not automatically deepen people, right? Sometimes it interrupts them, sometimes it silences them, sometimes it prevents the work from ever being made. This is why I think the phrase suffering makes great art should be replaced with something more honest, which is processed experience can make great art. And processed experience does not have to be tragic. It can be about joy, about their memory, their curiosity, about love, about embarrassment, about peace, envy, faith, routine, anything. It could be about a strange feeling of walking home at night and suddenly realizing your life has changed. Artists do not need to suffer more. They need to notice more. Still, it is undeniable that suffering has produced some of the most powerful works in art history. The question is not whether suffering appears in art. Of course it does. The question is how we talk about it. Francis Bacon is useful here because his work almost demands that we talk about pain. His paintings are really disturbing and distorted and even violent. Human figures look trapped inside their own bodies, faces seem to collapse or scream. There is this anxiety in the painting itself. Bacon once said that desperation and unhappiness are useful to an artist because they stretch the artist's sensibility, a quote attributed to his interview in The Artist Observed. So, on one level, I understand what he means. Pain can change perception. Anyone who has experienced grief knows this. After a loss, they become strange. A grocery store can feel unbearable. A familiar song can feel threatening. Suffering can make the world appear much colder, more symbolic. It can reveal what we normally avoid seeing. But there is a dangerous leap from saying pain can alter perception to saying pain is good for artists. A car accident might teach someone how fragile life it is, but that does not mean we should romanticize car accidents. The insight that comes after suffering does not make the suffering itself sacred. This is where the cultural misunderstanding happens, right? We look at Bacon's distorted bodies and say, see, suffering creates great art, but that gives suffering too much credit. Bacon's despair did not paint those canvases by itself. His artistic decisions did. The composition, the color, the distortion, the framing, the violence of the brushwork, those are his choices. The suffering may have stretched his attention, but craft gave the suffering its form. That distinction matters because it gives agency back to the artist. If we say pain creates art, then the artist becomes almost passive, like a vessel for damage. But if we say artists transform experiences into art, then we recognize their labor. Emmanuel Levinas argued that extreme suffering resists meaning. His idea of useless suffering does not mean the suffering person is useless. It means suffering itself should not be justified or explained right away or treated as if it automatically serves a higher purpose. For Levinas, the ethical response to another person's pain is not to turn it into a lesson, but to recognize it and respond it with care. This idea challenges a lot of the language we use around pain. When someone suffers, people often rush to make it meaningful. They say, everything happens for a reason, or this will make you stronger, or in the case of artists, hey, at least you can use it for your work. But imagine saying that to someone in the middle of grief. Imagine someone has lost a parent, and instead of sitting with them, we tell them this. Hey, one day this will make a beautiful poem. That is not compassion. That is turning their pain into future content. It's commercializing their pain. Levinas helps us to see why this feels wrong, because some suffering should not be redeemed too quickly. Some pain does not need an explanation. Sometimes the most ethical response is not interpretation, but to witness it. Art can do this too. A painting, a song, a film, or poem does not always need to answer the question, why did this happen? Sometimes it only needs to say, this is just what it felt like. That is not a small thing. For someone who feels alone in suffering, recognition can matter more than explanation. Arthur W. Frank's idea of chaos narratives developed this further. Frank uses the term to describe forms of suffering that do not fit into a clean story of recovery or redemption. In many familiar narratives, pain follows a comforting arc. Something bad happens, the person struggles, the person learns, the person heals and grows, and the suffering becomes meaningful. Chaos narratives resist that structure. They describe experiences more unresolved, more fragmented. Think of someone living with chronic pain that has no clear diagnosis. Their life does not unfold like a movie. There may not be a brilliant doctor who discovers the answer. There might not be a cure. There may be no scene where the pain disappears and everyone cries with relief and get a happy ending. Instead, there are countless of appointments, waiting rooms, medication changes, canceled plans, and the humiliation of not being believed. Or think of a person caring for a loved one with an illness. There may be love in that story, but there's also repetition. The same questions asked again and again, the same tasks becoming harder, the same grief coming in those small installments. It is not one traumatic loss, but 1,000 little ones. Mainstream storytelling often struggles with this kind of suffering because audiences are trained to expect resolution. We want pain to become wisdom, and we want that illness to become inspiration. We want trauma to become an origin story. But chaos narratives remind us that not every wound becomes a lesson, and not every story ends with emotional closure. This is where art has a difficult responsibility. If art forces suffering into a hopeful structure too quickly, it can become dishonest. But if art refuses all form, it may become impossible to communicate. The challenge is to give shape to chaos without pretending chaos was secretly ordered all along. Nietzsche's writing on Greek tragedy is helpful here. He argued that ancient Greek tragedy brought two forces together, the Dionysian and the Apollyon. So the Dionysian represents chaos, intensity, emotion, music, and the terrifying excess of life. The Apollyon represents form, image, structure, and clarity. So the tragedy matters here because it does not deny chaos, but it does not leave chaos shapeless. It gives human beings a way to face what would otherwise overwhelm them. So this is a more useful model for art than the tortured artist myth. The tortured artist myth worships chaos. Nietzsche's model actually suggests that art happens when chaos meets that form. A person can be devastated by their parents' divorce, for example, but devastation alone is yet not art. The first draft of their story may be full of rage about every argument, every betrayal, every unfair detail. That first draft might be emotionally true, but artistically unfocused. The work becomes stronger when the artist begins to ask, what is this really about? Is this about the divorce, or is it about the day I realized adults could lie? Is it about anger, or is it about abandonment? This is where real art begins, not in the raw pain alone, but in the shaping of it. The same is true for music. A musician might write a song after a period of depression. The emotion may be very much heavy and unresolved, but the song still requires those decisions. Should the melody risk or stay flat? Should the lyrics be direct or fragmented? Should the final chord resolve, or should it leave the listener suspended? Those decisions matter. They're not symptoms. They are the craft itself. So this is also why the tortured artist myth is insulting to these artists. It acts as if suffering did the work for them. It reduces Van Gogh to madness, Plath to suicide, Kahlo to pain. But these artists were not simply wounded people who accidentally produced beauty. They were serious workers with their art form, with their technique, their intelligence, and their discipline. Sylvia Plath, for instance, was not powerful merely because she was sad. She was powerful because she had command over her imagery, her rhythm, her tone, and her metaphors. Her work is just not emotional, it is really precise. If you think about Frida Kahlo, she did not simply paint paint. She developed this visual language involving the body, about Mexican identity, gender, politics, religion, and selfhood. Van Gogh was also not just tormented, he studied the color, the movement, composition, and light of paintings. When we overfocus on artists' suffering, we flatten their achievement. We turn their craft into biography. And we also treat their work as evidence of damage instead of evidence of mastery. Adorno takes this issue in another direction. After the Holocaust, he questioned whether art could continue in old beautiful forms without becoming morally compromised. His famous statement that to write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric is often simplified or misquoted, but the broader concern is that art should not turn catastrophe into something polished, comforting, or even easily consumed. This is still relevant today. Sometimes art aestheticizes suffering so completely that suffering becomes almost pleasurable to watch. But real suffering is not often beautiful. It is repetitive, awkward, boring, and humiliating. It is a person not answering messages. It is a sink full of dishes. It's a hospital hallway. It's a family repeating the same argument over and over again because nobody knows what else to do. This is why Adorno admired Samuel Beckett. Beckett's Endgame does not turn suffering into something elegant or redemptive. The play takes place in a bare room with Ham, who is blind and cannot stand clove, who cannot sit and serves him, and Ham's parents, Nag and Nell, who live in trash cans. The world of a play is bleak. It's dependent, it's absurd, it's repetitive and decaying. Adorno wrote seriously about Endgame, and later scholarship often discusses Beckett as an important example of post-catastrophe art that refuses easy consolation. What makes Endgame powerful is not that it teaches a clear lesson, it does not offer an inspiring message about resilience, it does not transform suffering into personal growth. Instead, it forces the audience to sit with dependency, about cruelty, about exhaustion, and about meaninglessness. That can be uncomfortable, but the discomfort is honest. This kind of art matters because it resists the lie that all suffering is secretly beautiful. Some suffering is ugly, some suffering is absurd and makes no sense at all. And some suffering does not enable people. Some suffering makes people petty, tired, cruel, and strange. Beckett allows that to exist on the stage without clearing it up for us. At the same time, I do not think this means all art about suffering has to be bleak. There is a difference between false comfort and genuine hope. A romantic comedy, for example, is not automatically dishonest because it ends happily. Joy is not shallow because it is joyful. Comedy can also tell the truth. Love stories can also tell the truth. The issue is not whether art is dark or light. The issue is whether it is honest. A shallow tragedy can be just as false as a shallow comedy. A film that glamorizes depression is not deeper than a film that honestly portrays ordinary happiness. Darkness is not the same as depth. This is where I think many young artists get trapped. They become fluent in pain but inexperienced in peace. If the only time you write is when you're heartbroken, then heartbreak will start to feel like your only creative source. If the only time you paint is when you're spiraling, emotional chaos will start to feel like inspiration. But maybe sadness is not the source of your creativity. Maybe it's just the emotional state you have practiced from the most. That changes the question. Instead of asking, will I lose my creativity if I heal? Maybe the better question could be, what parts of my creativity have I neglected because I only trusted pain as the only source material? There are entire worlds of experiences that artists can explore outside of suffering. So what should artists do with suffering? I don't think the answer is to avoid it. Avoidance would be dishonest. Art should be able to speak about grief, about illness, about trauma, about violence, about despair and loneliness. But artists do not need to pursue that suffering or preserve that suffering or romanticize that suffering in order to make serious work. Suffering can be material, but it should not be the method. You can write about heartbreak without continuing to chase people who hurt you, and you can make work about depression without refusing help because you're afraid wellness will make you ordinary. You can use painful memories in your art without turning your entire identity into a wound. The artist's responsibility is not to remain damaged. The artist's responsibility is to remain honest. And sometimes honesty requires distance. When you are inside an experience, all you may be able to say is, "This fucking hurts." Later, you may be able to understand the shape of it. You may see what caused it and what it changed, what it revealed, what it actually stole, and what remained at the end. The later understanding is not less authentic. It may actually be more artistically useful. This is why healing does not have to threaten creativity. Healing can give the artist more range. It can allow them to process it and not write only from the pain, but about the pain. It can give them access to the irony or the tenderness and the perspective and the complexity of the situation. It can also help them stop confusing that intensity with truth. The myth of the tortured artist teaches people that destruction is glamorous, but actual artistic practice is often not glamorous at all. It is revision. It is learning that technique. It is also showing up when nothing dramatic is happening. It lies in between making those bad drafts, cutting your favorite lines, starting over and over again, and slowly becoming better at seeing. That is much less romantic image than the suffering genius, but it is also much more respectful. Because the artist is not powerful because they suffer. Everyone suffers. The artist is powerful because they can take that experience seriously enough to shape it into something they can communicate. Sometimes that experience is devastating. Sometimes it is ordinary. Sometimes it is joyful. The depth is not in the damage. The depth is in the attention. So no, you don't need to suffer to make great art. You need to live carefully enough to notice what is life doing to you. You need to develop that craft. You need to resist easy meanings. You need to tell the truth without turning your pain into a performance. And if suffering enters your work, as it often will, you do not need to worship it. You can acknowledge it, examine it, transform it, and still refuse to let it become the center of who you are. Maybe the better artist is not the one who suffers the most. Maybe the better artist is the one who can look at suffering clearly without mistaking it for holiness. Maybe the most radical thing an artist can do is not to be destroyed beautifully, but to keep living, to keep noticing, and to make work that is from the full range of being human. Because art does not need you broken, it needs you awake. Hi, I'm Nash, and I really hoped you enjoyed my essay about the tortured artist. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe. I have a lot of essays written over the summers that I want to make a video of, and I've just been too lazy to do it. But I'm back, and hopefully I'll keep the rhythm once I do it. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions about it. I hope you guys have a great day, and ciao! Another cat mention. Augie. Hello. Hello. She is not in the mood, but I hope you are. All right, have a good night. Bye.